Hello and welcome. Okay, I just need you to.
Hi, good afternoon, Marco. Good afternoon, listeners. How are you doing?
Are you talking to me or are you asking the listeners?
Both, Marco.
Well, I'm doing better. I'm almost there, and apologies
Okay.
that I cannot be with you live in studio. But such are things. I think it's just better to look after the health of everybody concerned. That would be you and everybody else at CCFM. So I'm almost there. Just
Okay.
getting over
Don't worry.
a bit of the
We're
coughing.
waiting for you.
Okay, okay, I'll get there. I'll get there. But listen, we got a juicy
Mm,
topic today. Yeah, on the world of property with Meraki Property Solutions. Like I said, I've got my favorite realtor in the whole world, Carmen Hamildin, of course, the visionary and the founder of Meraki Property Solutions. So this is what I want to hear from you because you've prepared this topic. But I know that this can be a bugbear for a lot of tenants. And, when you come to an agreement with the owner or the landlord, and it's all about deposits and deductions. And today it's about navigating tenant deposit deductions. So it's quite juicy. And so, if you are a tenant, this is the episode for you in season two, by the way. We are in season two. Hashtag just saying. So, Carmen, let's find out about
yes.
this very contentious issue sometimes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think there was just a
Just waiting on you.
bit of a lag there on the internet quickly.
Okay.
But otherwise, we're
Okay.
good.
So, I was talking
Sorry.
about today's
Mm.
topic. Enlighten us about this very contentious issue sometimes about tenant deposit deductions and what that
Mm.
entails.
Okay, Marcus. So, what I found in my experience as a rental agent is that often we have the most fabulous relationship with tenants. And then the day of the move out inspection, all of that, like 12 months of a stunning
Mm,
relationship, all of a sudden just goes like in the opposite direction. And
yeah.
we found that it's mostly due to deductions that could come off a tenant's deposit, and we find often it because there's no alignment between expectations and what is expected with the tenant's deposit. So, what we tell tenants when we collect the deposit and have the lease agreement signed is that the tenant deposit belongs to the tenant. It's invested in an interest bearing account until the end of the lease period. And the tenant, by adhering to the terms of the lease agreement and by looking after the property, they are basically protecting their deposit, which sits in this interest bearing account until they move out. And the deposit is really like an insurance for the landlord to protect them from any arrear rental or any damages that may incur to the property. However, we need to make sure that the proper processes have been followed and that the proper paperwork is in place before we can do any deductions from a tenant's deposit.
Okay. Let's go back. Let's go back, and
Mm,
maybe we should just start from the very beginning, and let's start with the landlords. And can you
mm.
clarify what landlords are legally allowed to deduct from a tenant's deposit?
Okay, so it's normally for any arrears based on arrear rental or any other charges such as municipality charges, utilities, etc. So any arrears that have accrued that the tenant perhaps did not pay in terms of the lease agreement, and then any damages to the property. But what the Rental Housing Act says is fair wear and tear accepted. So the landlord has
Okay.
to take wear and tear to the premises into consideration. And wear and tear can also be a very contentious subject because what wear and tear can often mean to the one would not mean to the other. And there is
Yes.
no, there can be a dispute around what fair wear and tear is. So I feel what the importance is actually educating the tenant from day one when doing the moving inspection on what could be deducted. We normally do what we call an interim inspection as well. So midway through the lease, we will do another inspection to just also, it will help us determine are we going to renew the lease or not. And then also just to point out to the tenant any possible deductions that could come from the deposit that they should work on before they move out. And
Okay.
then we also have what we call a move out expectation list, which we would send to the tenant and say, before you move out, if you tick these boxes, you could then eliminate any deductions from your deposit. So I feel that making them aware of what the expectations are, making sure it's covered in your lease agreement, and then also just communicating to the tenant as well as to the landlord what the expectations are around deductions from the deposit.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about that. You've alluded to some things, but how do you distinguish between normal wear and tear and damage that warrants a deduction?
Okay, so things we need to look at, Marco, is age of the property, condition of the property when the tenant moved in, and then also lifespan of the certain things in the premises. So, for instance, if you look at painting, um, say the landlord has painted the property before the tenant moved in. What kind of paint did he use? What quality of paint did he use? What is the lifespan of that paint? If he were living in the property and he needed to repaint the premises again, would he do it in 3 years, in 5 years, in 7 years? The same thing, for instance, like flooring and carpets. What was the age of the carpet? What was the condition of the carpet? Because I've had an experience, for example, I don't know if tenants don't own ironing boards, but many a times in a property when we do the move out inspection, there's an iron mark on the carpet, right?
Oh,
And we used there was a stage where we would deduct the deposit, we would deduct the cost of replacing the carpet, and because the evidence is there, like, what's the dispute? But we got to a point where I actually had a matter that was at the rental housing tribunal, and the we had to work out how long was that carpet in the property, what was the condition of the property. So even though the tenant was negligent by having this burn mark on the carpet, we could not hold him responsible for the replacement of the carpet of the entire room, because a carpet, you can't really replace a section of it. You need to do the whole room's
okay.
carpet. So we had to learn things like how to apportion it cost based on the age of the product, and also what percentage the tenant would then be liable for.
Okay. So there's more questions I want to ask you. But
Okay.
to those who are listening now, if you want to ask questions, you can go over to Facebook as well as YouTube, and then you can pop a question in there, or alternatively, send it to WhatsApp and I'll insert it into the stream, and then Carmen can answer if we do have time for that. So, Carmen, in cases where there's disagreements on deductions, how can landlords and tenants compromise? I hope they can compromise.
Okay, so firstly, Marco, in order to do a deduction, we need to have a clear move in inspection to show that this was the condition of the property when the tenant moved in and took occupation. Then we have to have a clear move out inspection and say this was the condition of the property when the tenant moved out, and then we need to marry the two. And only where there is clear differences between the move in and move out, then can we discuss deductions from the deposit. The Rental Housing Tribunal is also very strict that we need to communicate at the move out inspection what will be deducted from the tenant's deposit, and the tenant needs to be made aware of it before we do any deductions. If the tenant requests any quotes or receipts thereafter, we need to provide them with. So, what I often find, Marco, if there is a dispute, so should always have our evidence, our move in, our move out, both our reports and our photos. And if there are any disputes, we always look at how can we compromise. So, for instance, if there was an instance where the property was painted 5 years ago, but the tenant was in there for 3 years, and the tenant perhaps damaged a wall or a room that needed to be repainted, or
Yeah.
perhaps the areas that the landlord paid for 5 years ago needed to be repainted, then we will actually work on a formula where we apportion it to the number of years and then try and take a portion from the tenant and a portion to the landlord, because we then find that is a fair compromise. Because at the end of the day, people live in the property. You know, there's a difference between somebody or a kid writing on the wall with crayon versus scuff
Yeah.
marks from walking in the property. So those are the things we will look at, take into consideration, and then discuss between the parties.
And I know this can become a very sensitive issue,
Mm,
but we also need to realize whose investment this is. It's always on
absolutely.
the owners,
Yes.
whether we like it or not. If we
Mm,
are only tenants,
mm,
it's not our property, and
yeah.
it's always going to lie at the feet of the owners. There is a question I want to get to, but let's talk about some of the common misconceptions that tenants have about the deposit deductions.
So, what we have found is that tenants often feel that, say, for instance, we're at the move out inspection and we say these are the deductions from the deposit. Tenants feel that they should be given an opportunity to get the cheapest quote or get the job done themselves, or be given an opportunity to rectify what we want to deduct from the deposit. So the thing is, the tenants are given an opportunity until the date of the move out inspection to make sure that they make good. That's why we communicated at the move in, we communicated at the midterm, and we send them a letter as well when the lease expires, to remind them on what their responsibilities are when they move out of the property, right? So on the day of the move out inspection, we will not allow you to source quotes for the best option, or to come back tomorrow to do X or Y. You were given opportunity until the date of the move out inspection. So if the property is not restored by that date, we will continue to do those deductions on your deposit and point it out to you at the inspection.
So Shireen says that she loves the topic of conversation, and then I'll just veer off a little bit. Common. Let's quickly get to this question. I'll put it on screen. It says, "Good day. The place I live in is moldy in winter, and when letting the landlord know, uh, they got some kind of black paint and painted the one outside wall. Then afterwards, I got a new contract that states I am responsible to keep the walls mold free. Can you please advise?"
Oh, so mold issues is a big thing in Cape Town, Marco, especially in
Yeah.
the climate that we live in. And last year was probably one of the worst winters we experienced when it came to damp and mold. So there are two things we look at when it's mold, right, Marco? The first thing is structural. Is there something based on the structure of the property that is affecting the mold? So maybe you've got a bathroom that doesn't have a window and there isn't an extractor fan in, or maybe there is weep holes that are blocked up and that is causing damp during the window, etc. So if it's anything structural or based on the design of the property that is causing mold, that would be the landlord's responsibility, or the body corporate if it's a scheme. And that becomes very difficult when we have to deal with the managing agent, because there's damp on the exterior walls, etc. And then the second part we will look at is living conditions. So the tenant does also have a responsibility. And the tenant needs to do things like once you've showered, make sure you open up the windows. If you see water running down the wall or dripping, etc., wipe it down. If you are drying your clothes with on a clothes horse or something inside the house and your windows and doors are closed all day, it's going to create mold. So I would always, try and get out a professional like a contractor to come and assess, report on it, tell us what the root of the problem is, and
Yeah.
then discuss this between the landlord and the tenant.
Okay, so let's get to some more questions. Let's go here quickly. Says, good afternoon. What if the tenants lived in the separate entrance and they, okay, I'm
Wasted.
not sure, wasted water, and the something about the yard being dirty outside and the tenants don't want to pay the landlords. Okay.
Okay, so there it comes down to what are the terms of your lease agreement. Number one, what
Yeah.
is the responsibilities around keeping? Because if you're living in a separate entrance, it means areas like the yard could be common property, right? Or shared spaces. So, what are the conditions of the lease agreement? Who is responsible for the upkeep of the exterior of the premises or the shared or common spaces? And then also, what do you have in terms of your lease regarding how utilities are consumed and how utilities are metered? If we're going to be charging tenants or recovering consumption costs from tenants, there has to be a system where it's effectively metered what the usage is before we can bill them for any consumption. Even if it's a sub meter, we need to be able to say this is the usage from tenants. We find with multiple dwellings like that, the biggest problem can be is that there's only 1 meter on the property, and then often people want to apportion it according to number of persons living in each dwelling. But it becomes a dispute of, but I shower twice a day. I only do washing once a week, but they do washing every day. So how do you handle or monitor that kind of thing? If you've got
Yeah.
multiple dwellings and you want to recover utility consumption, the best is to put in some sort of device that can accurately measure the consumption.
Okay, so staying on that topic, there's another question that's coming through. I told you this is going to be a hot one. And says, hi, Marco, great topic. If you have a sub water meter that's being used by the tenant and the meter becomes faulty while in the possession of the tenant, who is responsible for a replacement? Please note the landlord never makes use of the same meter.
Marco, there again, I would get a professional in on there who supplied the meter or installed the meter to actually check out the meter and see what is the reason for the meter being faulty. It could be a factory default. It could be, a supplier problem. Are they When they say the meter is faulty, what could the tenant have done to have caused the faulty meter? And probably the installers or suppliers of the meter will be the best persons to advise on that. If they're going to fix or replace the meter, if they can give a report to say what was the cause or what they presume was the cause of the faulty
Yeah.
meter. So, like in cases like that, we can always make assumptions, but I like to get reports from the professionals, because
Yeah.
I don't know about mold, I don't know about meters, I don't know about DB boards. So I will rely on professionals to give me a report which I could present to the landlord and the tenant based on their specialized field, and then that is sort of how I can justify making certain decisions.
Yeah, I think it's important to have agreements in place, especially
Mm,
where these water meters are concerned, sub meters or the like.
mm,
And I think sign off on something as well and have an
mm,
agreement that if it was in working order when you received it or when it was
Mm,
installed, then of course then there's a clear boundary there in terms of you had a
mm,
working meter, and then where does the responsibility lie? Would it then be the tenants or the owners? Because these things are expensive. I
mm.
have a bit of experience with this issue as
Exactly.
well. So I think it's best that there are agreements in place. And man, the questions are
Absolutely.
coming through thick and fast. And sure, the Arama tenants and Arama landlords. There's another question that came through: is fixing the toilet the landlord's responsibility?
There again, Marco, like I will always say, what is the cause of the problem? If you've got a 10-year-old toilet that has never been serviced or the whatever parts have never been replaced and the tenant is in there for a month or two, should the tenant be held responsible for that leaking toilet? But once again, the lease will normally specify who's responsible for consumables like light fittings, washers, door handles, and that kind of thing. But then again, it also boils down to what was the condition of those items when you handed it over to the tenant.
Sure, I'm
Mm,
trying to catch up here with every. I'm on
mm,
different platforms here. So many questions coming through here. I don't think we'll be able to touch on everything. We're running over time as well as it is. But I knew today was going to be one of those topics that it should not really be contentious if there's proper
mm.
agreements in place. But like you mentioned, when
Absolutely.
it comes to deductions, everything was rosy before until you now have to
Yeah.
get to who pays the cost of something. There was another question that came through at the beginning, maybe a little bit easier to answer, I think. So this is from Esmeralda. It says, is there a way where ordinary people, example stay-at-home moms who have spare time on hand, can attend a short course to assist owners regarding rentals, for example, the dogs and the do's and don'ts, sorry, the spelling error there, and to tenants as well. That's from Esmeralda.
Okay, so Esmeralda can pop me a WhatsApp. I mean, w- maybe the next topic to cover at the next roadshow, Marco. We didn't go
Yes.
into much details with leasing, so we will definitely take that into consideration. And then Esmeralda, I will just add you to the mailing list as well because I'm doing weekly newsletters as well where I cover short topics. So the topic we did last week on the income for self-employed, for instance, I've put that onto a LinkedIn newsletter, so it's available to share. So I'll do the same with this as well, and then just keep everybody updated once we have the next roadshow as well, and keep that in mind as a topic.
Okay, so let's give you one more question, and can you share some strategies for landlords and tenants to fairly split maintenance costs during a tenancy?
So it starts again with lease agreement, agree and making sure that the lease also covers, and also if the tenant is going to be done doing any additions or improvements to the property or making any changes to the property, that the tenant communicates this to the landlord before the tenant does so, and that an agreement is reached in writing on what will happen when the tenant moves out, right? So often tenants who do improvements or adjustments because they want to make their living a bit more comfortable or a bit safer. And then they expect when they're leaving at the end of the lease, well, I put up that security gate, I'm taking it with me. I put on that toilet seat, I'm taking it with me, etc. So have an agreement with your landlord or your rental agent, informing them or at least getting permission that these are the adjustments, improvements that will be made and how it will be handled at the end of the lease term. So again, it comes down to communication, Marco, making sure lease agreement is in place with clear instructions, and if there's any adjustments, that it's then reduced to writing again on email or by form of an addendum on the lease agreement. And then maybe, so landlords must also take into consideration, yes, the tenant is going to live there. They're putting up the security gate or they're doing X, Y, Z. But at the end of the day, if the tenant leaves it there, it adds value to their property as well. So it
Yes.
could assist both parties if you compromise and decide to go on a 50-50. And so instead of the tenant taking off that security gate when he leaves at the end of the lease, he actually leaves it there because the landlord has contributed to it, which means that
Yeah.
there's more value for the next tenant that he lets it to.
Yeah. I know we got to land. And also, when it comes to body corporate sectional titles as well, just also, and I speak on authority here, just make sure that there are fixtures that remains fixtures.
Yeah.
So whether you are the landlord or tenant, remember those things are fixtures, and that affects the buying and selling of property big time. So there's many things to consider, and we also realize again we need loads more time here on the show, and that's why we're gonna take the show on the road again.
Yes.
But come on, just contact details before we go.
Okay, so 079 495 7358. That's 079 495 7358, and that is WhatsApp friendly. And then my email is Carmen at Meraki Property Solutions.coza, and Meraki is Meraki. You can search Meraki Property Solutions. We're available on all the social media platforms, as well as we've got a website as well.
Sure, and I like that our listeners are so clever. This one says so. Best practice would be for tenants to record all fixtures, etc., and save those images or videos on the cloud in case of an argument that breaks out if items are broken. I think that's sage
100%,
advice.
100%, yeah.
Very, very clever. Ons het slim mense hierso by
Yeah.
CCFM, and ek het 'n slim realtor ook, my favorite realtor in the whole world. But we gotta go. So many questions that we couldn't get to for today. But that is the nature of what happens with the show, and especially the slot. So, Carmen, thank you so much
Okay.
for everything. Until next time, God bless
Absolutely.
you.
Bye bye, everybody.